To this year's Flow Green Film Festival, an annual collaboration between the Architects League and the Environmental Committee of Franklin Lakes, Oakland, and Wyckoff. My name is Ryan Moran, and I am the Architect League's President-Elect. I'll be standing in for Chris Hendrickson tonight, who due to a non-pandemic related health issue was unable to attend. As a note for our audience members, you have been muted by the administrator. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to click the Q&A tab on the bottom of your Zoom screen anytime to submit them. We're going to start screening tonight's short films, and then I'll introduce our very special guests for tonight's panel discussion. Just a warning that you may need to adjust your audio settings for the film playback. Okay, well, before we begin the panel discussion, I would like to thank and congratulate our panelists, not only on the films, but the passion and motivation behind them. I want to remind our audience members, if you have any questions or comments, please submit them by clicking the Q&A tab on the bottom of your Zoom. Please join me in welcoming our panelists tonight. From Hawaii, David Sellers of Hawaii Offgrid.
Hello.
Hopefully joining us soon is Hana Kassem of Kohn Pederson Fox. And unfortunately, the members from 33M could not be here tonight. Miriam has a family health issue that she's dealing with, and our thoughts and prayers are with her. And from New Jersey, representing the Flow Committee and fellow Architects League member, J.R. Frank.
Good evening.
Before we get into questions, I would like to invite our panelists to quickly introduce themselves. And as a fair warning to everyone, if my dog starts barking, I will quickly go on mute and apologize in advance for any interruption. David, would you like to start?
Sure, thank you. So my name is David Sellers. I am the principal architect of Hawaii Off-Grid Architecture and Engineering. We have somewhat of a dynamic firm, small firm, in that we have civil engineering, structural engineering, and architecture all in-house, and we're working towards getting electrical and mechanical because of the projects that we work on are a little bit more complex for residential. But we do residential, commercial, grid scale, energy, and microgrids. So we've kind of also looked at a different business model in that we have a solutions side of our company that provides microgrids, planning, installation, management, and we're also a battery dealer and work with a battery that's based out of Hawaii. So we're trying to merge architecture and technology to be more receptive and ready for what we're building right now to be more sustainable and integrated.
Wow. You got a real good collaboration of trades there with all the members in one team.
It's part of the environment that we're in because it's such a small place, but we have quite a bit of substantial development. So it's hard to find the consultants that we need in order to be timely. Everyone is so busy because there's just so few people. And it's hard, the market doesn't bear out to have just a ton of different architects and mechanical and electrical engineers. So we've put everything together out of necessity, and it's actually worked out to be more profitable in a way. And it allows us to do a lot more work than we would usually do if we just focus on architecture.
That's good to hear. JR?
Just a quick intro. The Green Film Festival is something that was developed between the environmental commissions of Franklin Lakes, Wyckoff, and Oakland. And it's kind of a growth of something called Green Teams. The Green Teams are subcommittees within the environmental commissions of each of the municipalities, And in fact, most of the municipalities within Bergen County have these green teams. So it's something that maybe some of our members might want to explore, because it's a way of having an impact on some of the ordinances that are being formed within these municipalities. So there's an opportunity, I think, for our members to reach out to their local municipalities and see if they want to be more involved with their environmental commissions. Because again, the environmental commissions do act as consultants for the planning and basically Board of Adjustments. So I think that's something that I think our members should be looking towards. But again, getting back to the Green Film Festival, the thought was that to provide a kind of a think and do type of a concept, where we present a film addressing environmental issues, and then what can be done at the local level to help address them. And as an example, this year we're doing something on fast fashion, which has to do with the amount of waste that's being generated by the fashion industry, let alone the sources of some of the cotton products, as I hope most people are aware of today. And that'll happen sometime either later in April or might be later in the year. We're in the process of putting that together. But again, we really appreciate the fact that the local chapter AI is part of this and helping us bring this to a broader audience.
And we're happy to have it. Every year we've been participating so far, it's just been better and better, including this year. We're definitely one-upping the last couple of years. I have a couple questions for David, unless JR, you want to?
No, when you start, Brian, I think.
Okay. I think let's start with one. Have you had any feedback from a community level about the off-grid living?
Yeah, so, one of the things that we are dealing with is the lack of infrastructure here in Hawaii, the cost of building, cost of materials. So we have places that are just great places to live, but are not accessible to utilities. So that makes us design things out of necessity. But now with the move of sustainability, we're seeing this, we get what we call grid defectors. People don't want to go on the grid. They have the option. And now the cost and the financial instruments that are available, plus the subsidies, it's really easy to do a return on investment. So if we look at, having to bring power in, I usually calculate it at $8,000 to $10,000 a power line pole in some of these remote locations. And it's really quick. If we need 10 poles to get to your location, we might as well just invest in an energy system. That way, at the end of the energy system's life cycle, you're hundreds of thousands of dollars, ahead. We're paying for the most for electricity in the nation. And so it's an easy sell for us. And sometimes there's no choice. So on the community level, we actually have on the state side, community solar projects. And so they're encouraging it. Obviously, we have some issues with our utility, which is a private for most of Hawaii. And there's a somewhat of a conflict, and we're taking customers away. So it's a balance, but all in all, the community stands behind it. One of the things that attracted me and brought me from Europe to Hawaii was the respect for and the sustainable aspects of the culture that are endemic in the whole host culture of Hawaiians. So it's something that we're moving towards. On Maui, we just hit 50% of our power was generated from renewable sources, primarily solar, also wind. And then we're also really grateful that we have one of the biggest biofuel manufacturers, in the country right here. So all in all, it's very much encouraged, embraced, and we're moving faster and faster every year.
That's good. Talk about being in a unique situation. The fact that you're an island, you're so remote from everything, but also being sort of a tropical paradise, you have lots of sun, lots of solar gain that you can take advantage of. And one thing that I had thought about was you're unique in the fact that Hawaii gets so much rain that 15,000 gallon cistern fills up probably pretty quick. Have you had any issues with anything like that, or is it really all self-sufficient?
For the most part, it's really self-sufficient. We have sort of tuned into and refined our system for calculating water. The problem that we have is that we have data that goes back about 80 years. So we work with the University of Hawaii to get their rainfall data, and we can pinpoint exact weather stations. That data is only about 85 years old. So the issue there is that we're seeing trends and weather patterns that don't fit within that data set. So we do, and last year we've had a drought for the last 5 years in Maui counties particularly, and we're having to plan in a little bit more resiliency than we were a few years ago. That also is a really unique part of Hawaii, is that we have so many microclimates. So we can have a place like here on the west side of Maui where I'm at. If you're up in the mountains, it's one of the rainiest places on the planet. But where I'm at right now, which is close to the ocean, it's basically arid, 20 inches of rain or less a year. So it's such a vast difference, which is really nice as an architect, because we get to use so many different, design and techniques for dealing with these different climates. So we're always dealing with different typologies of building elements and different strategies for responding to the environment, which in most places would not be applicable. So it's really unique in that sense.
Actually, I have one question which we really didn't touch upon, is the fact that we're looking at rainwater capture. Now the question becomes, the thing that we at least wanted to address is, what are you doing for sanitary, in the sense of, is there using a septic system that's basically purifying the water, or how are you handling it on these off-grid sites?
Sure. So we're involved in some large-scale wastewater systems, and that's one of the benefits of having a civil engineer in-house. So my partner is a civil engineer. We've worked with John Todd from the East Coast, as you guys might know, who makes the living machines. So we have worked on septic systems where we have recirculating sedge fields and then a final sand filter when we're working very close to, say, sensitive reef systems. So the water that comes out of those systems is basically your R1 water, I think is what it's called, where it's almost potable, right? So typically we use septic systems. I am not a fan of composting toilets, and I figure if we have plenty of water, let's do that. And we work a lot with agriculture, so there are reuses for a lot of these, for our waste.
And then how does that impact your typical site size, in the sense of, usually we have a septic system, you're kind of need a, let's just say 20,000 square feet. What is your typical site that you're working with?
Rule of thumb for, we usually look at the house, and the easy rule of thumb is a 1-to-1. So if we've got a 5,000 square foot house, we need a 5,000 square foot leach field, septic tank, general area when we look at setbacks and things like that.
What we were talking about, 1,000 square foot house, and usually when we work with something like that, it's really the number of bedrooms and the number of occupants. So now that you have a smaller footprint, now are you looking at 5,000 square feet for that field?
Well, for example, the LifeEdited house was 4 bedrooms technically, and I think we had an 800 square foot leach field and a 1,500 gallon septic tank.
Okay, excellent.
For your micro-housing, and especially the one in the video, do you track data from these places? Do the occupants allow you to kind of record water usage or power consumption so that you have better understanding in the future of how to refine what you're doing?
Sure. Yeah. So that's one of the unique things about what we do, is actually being the designer and installer and operator of the energy systems that we do. At any one point, I can pull up every energy system that we have installed. I can get real-time data and all the historical data. So we just finished up our winter, if you will, which means more rain and clouds, and of course, just a shorter solar day. So that's what I call the generator time of the year. Usually about, December, January, someone's generator comes on for the first time in 9 months, and it's always jarring because you're usually in a serene setting, and this biodiesel generator turns on. So we can see that all the time in real time. And we're also, we've been working with battery manufacturer Blue Planet Energy. And so we're a dealer of their both residential level and their microgrid level energy systems. And all of it is extremely monitored. In fact, we're working with them to install the next generation of monitoring that also has built-in controls for a variety of manufacturers of the power electronics. So it's really advancing. And this is the third generation within 5-6 years, I think. And so we've had input and have been helping to develop that product. And so it's really informed us in how we do things, and of course how we accommodate our clients. You know, showing them that on an app on your iPhone, you can monitor what's going on. You can make decisions about, you know, do you run the washer tonight, or do you wait in the morning? So you know, we've learned a lot from it, and it's constantly changing, and we're just trying to keep up with the technology at the same time.
Well, getting back to the battery technology, I guess, what kind of capital cost is it for a typical single family home? And then the question too is, assuming you have 3 or 4 days of rain, do you have battery life for that period of time? Is it typically one of your projects?
Sure. It depends on the location. So, you know, typically I would say that when we're looking at a single family residence of say 2 to 3 occupants, the capital costs are going to be in the $50,000 to $60,000 range. That's with minimal autonomy. So if we do have that long rainstorm, however, we always install a biodiesel generator. Biodiesel is produced locally. All the grease and used cooking oil is collected on island and turned into biodiesel from Pacific Biodiesel. So it's a renewable biofuel, 86% less emissions, and it provides local jobs. So it's really hard to beat that. And that's our base load power. So we always have that option if we have problems with the power electronics or the solar system. You know, with the cost of the energy system, I always try to help people understand and make an analogy. If you look back in the 1930s, 1940s, 50s, to have central air conditioning, say in hotter climates, it was a luxury, and it was very expensive for those first early adopters. Now, in the last 5, 6, 7 years, we're seeing that financial institutions, banks, are actually loaning the money to install these things in the very beginning. So it spreads out that capital cost, and now we're looking at it like we think about, central air conditioning in a building or a house. It's just part of what you pay for. Now the cost is of course increased, but when you look at the operating cost over the life of the system, you're going to be way ahead in our situation, specifically because of the cost of power. So your operating costs are going to be less. The bank actually likes that because that's your, debt to income ratio looks better. So yeah, it's making a big impact, actually being able to finance the systems from the very beginning and integrating them from the start.
And do you see a market developing, say, when a lot of these EVs vehicles start to age out and those batteries are no longer feasible for that type of a purpose, being repurposed it for residential use?
I don't really see that. For that LifeEdited house, we actually built an electric car for the house. We did that for 2 reasons. We didn't want an internal combustion generator. That was one of the keys because of the noise and the issues with maintenance. So today you can't buy a car that I'm aware of right now where we can take the power from the car and put it back into the house if needed. So we built a car that we could do that. Now we used recycled Tesla batteries to build that car. However, the batteries that we see in cars, they are changing, thanks in part to the restrictions that China is putting on cobalt-based lithium batteries. But they're typically a cobalt-based because they're lighter. So the LGs and the Teslas. What we recommend for residences and commercial for buildings is a lithium ferrous phosphate olefin. That's the chemistry. There's a couple different things that are really important about that. It doesn't have a thermal issue. So with say a cobalt battery like a Tesla, we have to circulate coolant through the battery to keep it thermally stable so it doesn't have a fire issue and have runaway thermal issues. So those are also 10% lighter. On the house side, the batteries that we're using, the lithium ferrous phosphate olivine, they're about 10% heavier, but you only move them twice, to install and then to remove at one point. We haven't reached the life cycle of any of our batteries yet. They have an expected life expectancy of 21 years at 80% efficiency. So I think that with the battery technology changing so fast, I think we're going to see a more robust, like cradle to cradle recycling of those car batteries, so that they can take the precious metals and everything and recycle them into the newest technology.
Okay. We have a question from one of our audience members. Again, with the unique location of Hawaii being a geo hotspot, is there any way of tapping into volcanic energy or other geothermal vents? Have you guys looked into that, mapped it out anywhere?
Yeah, so specifically, I have not, worked with any of that. However, on Hawaii Island, where we have a few projects, we just had our geothermal plant there go back online. Now, it had been shut down for a number of years because we had a lot of volcanic activity, and part of it was damaged in one of the last major volcanic flows. So we are doing that. We have experimental OTEC, the ocean thermal electricity that's being created. There's also been systems that have been designed and we're waiting for them to be implemented, which would be seawater air conditioning systems for Honolulu. So there's a lot of stuff that's going on because we have the 2045 initiative to be fully, renewable by 2045. And we're doing pretty good. We're on track. So there's a number of experimental projects like the geothermal, wave energy. The Department of Defense and the Navy are working on wave energy in Kaneohe Bay. So we've got a number of things like that. And that's one of the things that attracted me to Hawaii. I'm a transplant. I've been here just a little bit over 10 years now. And when I looked at Hawaii, and I'd never been interested, and I saw all these projects that were going on, I was like, well, this is where I want to be. I want to be part of it. So
it's sort of like an evolution of energy, like a Galapagos, where you're confined and you just now have to beat the clock and get better and better tech and install better, better design, try to meet the demands, changing weather.
And also maybe give it the fact that your cost per watt is, what are you, 30 cents now, something like that, or
36% per kilowatt hour. Right. So that's the highest in the nation. Yeah.
And then to give for our members, realize we're paying somewhere around 18 cents or less. So, that's why the again, the return on investment for solar is much quicker in Hawaii than it is in New Jersey. But I guess also we have to realize that New Jersey does have a lot of programs for photovoltaic. It's a shame that we're not able to incorporate them more into our buildings. And there's more, New Jersey has a clean energy program. And I think that's something that as a profession, we should be more engaged with and see how we can implement them in our designs.
I do want to compliment you guys. I mean, you're one of the leaders in the nation for your photovoltaics. So whatever you're doing, keep doing it. I mean, I'm really impressed. The last time that I flew into New Jersey, I was like, wow, look at all these solar panels. Because that's one of the interesting things when you come to Hawaii. Everybody always remarks, everybody has solar panels. And so good job.
Well, the way that basically was able to be implemented is that there's a surcharge, but from the utilities on our electric bill. And that money's kind of pooled together and utilized for grants. And the thinking behind that is the fact that it's much less expensive to provide additional power through photovoltaics than building a new power plant. And in fact, our nuclear power plant is aging out, so that's going to get interesting in the next 5 to 10 years, and how we're going to address that. But again, getting back to your how you observed that, the fact that New Jersey, the way we're able to get that happen is we're able to put dollars into people's hands and help mitigate some of the high initial capital costs for photovoltaics.
Nice.
I think a question that kind of spans all the films is that they all show a way to address resiliency and climate change on clearly different scales, from the individual house to large housing projects and beyond with 33M. What are ways that our members might be able to incorporate incorporate resilience and climate change into their own work, regardless of the scale and almost regardless of the location?
I think probably one of the easiest ways is looking at how could we reuse existing materials. I mean, look at, taking down a stone wall and being able to maybe use it for a project across the street is probably the most effective way of us, looking at overall life cost assessments. Also looking at materials that do have longer life expectancies to them. I think those are the type of things that and also these energy programs that are available to us. But the problem is that a lot of times these contractors don't want to go through the whole process of filing for that, for those dollars. It's much more cost effective for someone to put in that air conditioning system that might be a 12 SEER rather than the 18 SEER, and because the time that's costing the contractor to go through that paperwork, they're not being compensated for. So I don't know if there's an easy way of handling that, but I think those are some of the problems that are in front of us. But getting back to, I think some of the things that we can do is can we reuse? The question becomes, New Jersey's always, the size of some of the homes. I mean, and that's kind of, that's being driven by a lot of things, and I think those are the things we need to kind of revisit, again, but they're easier said than done with clients.
I want to touch on something that you just said, JR, but another thing that you had mentioned, David, I'm wondering if you have experience in this in your construction and design. Do you see recyclability of existing structures, or if somebody is taking down a house, do other people, or would you consider taking some of that material and incorporating it into a new design?
Sure. Yes, we have some programs here because just like with anything, we're limited with our land area. So on Maui, we actually have a landfill that is, the elevation is 100 feet higher than when it opened in the 30s, right? So we're running out of space. So we've been working with a nonprofit client of ours recently in the last year, and due to the pandemic, of course, things have gotten pushed out. But we're still making progress, and we're looking forward to opening hopefully in the fall. We have built an off-grid facility for them, utilizing solar and batteries, in which we have STEM interns every summer, but at the locals, like the younger child level or children level in school, elementary, middle school kids. This foundation, Malama Maui Nui, is designed to incorporate the kids and teach them about recycling, teach them about the issues with our waste. So the program that we're working with them on is to collect beach plastic and recycle the consumer products that are plastic, sort those plastics, then we grind them down, we heat them up, and then we extrude, we mill, and we mold plastics into products. So the kids are tasked with designing whatever they want to make from it, to learn about the life cycle and recycling of plastics, which plastics you can recycle, which ones you can't, and what it takes to do that. The idea there is that we're shifting paradigms in recycling because, especially with recycling steel, even making, Portland cement. Some of these things are very energy intensive, and they've stopped us from recycling in the past. They've just been a hurdle that's hard to overcome. Now there's a paradigm shift in that, right now we've got batteries that are completely full of energy and the sun is shining, and we need to do something with that power. So we have no carbon footprint, and we can spend as much energy as we want to recycle those materials. So it's a totally different ballgame. So we're working personally. We have a construction product that we're working on for building houses that increases our R value, lessens the need for skilled labor, and diverts waste streams from our landfill, and we're actually using it from waste from surfboard production. So that's one of our industries on island, plus the plastics that are washing up on the beach. So that to me is a big change.
We're doing something actually similar as part of the Bergen Hub. We're actually running styrofoam drives we're collecting the styrofoam and we're bringing it to a cold processor, and they're able to use that material to create actually architectural details. So again, looking at that waste material, which is one of those materials that are very light, so they really don't have much impact on the tipping costs for the municipalities, but they end up taking a lot of volume within the landfills. So that's something we're working on. We have a drive coming up in Ridgewood next month. So again, that's what we're doing on the local level.
Nice.
But I do have a question for you. What about the lead-based batteries for cars? Have any thought of utilizing them as your battery base for the homes?
Well, the problem with lead-based batteries is that you have a limited depth of discharge. So say with the batteries that we're using now, the lithium-based batteries, we can go from 100% state of charge to 0. The batteries that we install, you can do that 8,000 times under warranty. Lead-based batteries, 50% depth of discharge. So you have twice the usable capacity with a lithium battery. So I think it's probably better to, continue to use those lead-based batteries or just to recycle. There's good recycling programs for those already. So they don't have much of a use anymore. Also, there's an issue with the environment. They off gas. That's one of the things that we have to take really seriously when we work on some of these larger, older battery systems for telecoms. When we go into retrofit, it's a toxic waste site, just about. So, yeah, I think that those are going to basically go away altogether at one point.
David, if you don't mind, there was a line from your movie that jumped out at me. I'm just going to repeat it and then we'll have a little discussion about it. We have supersized ourselves in the last half century. We've gone from houses that were around 1,000 square foot in the 50s to 2,700 square foot now with smaller families. Personally, my mom is one of 7 kids, 2 adults, plus a grandmother living in a Levitt house in Long Island. That's high occupancy. And now, especially in our county here, we have very large houses, much smaller families. How do we change that mindset to revert back towards a more functional home, a smarter home, not just in its design, but also incorporating technology, AI, different rooms for different purposes or multi-purpose rooms?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, that's a cultural and it's difficult because we have, limited land use here. And of course we have the, like in a lot of places, we have the McMansion bills that, we don't want to see houses over a certain square footage. They go into another level of planning scrutiny and has to go before the planning commission. Many times we have houses that are more than 7,500 square feet in certain locations on the island. So those are discouraging. And it also throws, we have we usually insist that houses are not that big, but we have a client insisting on a 10,000 square foot house right now. And what we are running into is he doesn't want to take the chance of us designing the house, getting through SD and DD, and then we apply for planning permission and it gets kicked back, or it goes to a planning commission meeting and then the public can provide comment and shut them down. So it's a little bit of using society's, mechanisms to discourage that. But I think education is the key to a lot of things. I don't know how we get back to more of that, Frank Lloyd Wright's Usonian, principles, efficient, small, smart. But I think it's just got to be through education and understanding the effects that we're having on the environment by the amount of consumption. So, yeah, that's a tough one.
Yeah. You see maybe with these ADU units, the adult dwelling units, having an impact on your, with some of the designs that you're trying to focus on?
Sure. Well, it's created a lot of opportunity for us. However, with anything that we do as architects, it's very complicated because we have to deal with so many different things. So on the planning side and on the community side, they want more dwellings. We have a housing shortage. However, at the same side, we don't want more development. So by allowing the ADUs, we recently had an ADU bill pass where we can now put 2 ADUs on a property where used to we could not do that. We could only put 1. That's great, but is the infrastructure there? So we started running into all kinds of issues with with water meter sizes, sewer sizes, the need for manholes because of the amount of dwellings that we had. Also, then the parking ordinance. So you fix one thing and it just shows all these other problems that we're trying to deal with. So we're trying to work those out, and we're finding that we're one of the only professionals that are dealing with all the different bureaucratic agencies. So we're identifying these as we're trying to actually do them. We get shut down on one side and we're saying, well, they say we can do it, but you're saying no. So them saying we can do it doesn't mean anything. And so then it goes back to the county council and the mayor and the representatives of our government. And we just keep having that dialogue, trying to figure it out. So.
And it used to, I guess, the fact that the newer versions of the International Building Code, minimum bedroom sizes have disappeared. So at least on the code side of the equation, it seems there's been some progress made in that.
Definitely, yeah. And I mean, here, we're dealing with such a high cost of construction that we don't have those big houses as much for our local residents. Those are more for people typically that it's a second home. I mean, the terrible thing is we have a lot of people that are in need of housing, but we actually have about a 50% occupancy rate here on Maui. Most of the homes are sitting empty right now. So how can we utilize those homes? They're providing good jobs for people to build them, skilled labor. So what we want to do is we want to have those houses ideally connected to the grid, which is an antithesis of what our firm does. But we want to put solar power on those houses, so it's feeding back into the grid and providing that renewable energy. So we just got to find little wins that we can make everywhere, and try to make the best out of what we have. One of the things that I think is interesting in seeing you in New Jersey with the amount of rooftop solar that you have, if we took every residential roof in the country and all of the south-facing roofs, and we put solar panels on them, we could meet during sunny days our electricity demand for everything. Now, to make that happen, and to I know it's not architects that usually do it, but these McMansion roofs that have all the hips and everything going everywhere, if we could simplify those and orient them to the sun and make them work that way, then we're going to change the way we think about a house as not just someplace you live and it saves you money and rent if you own it, but it can actually be a power plant, and we're actually producing power for the rest of the community.
It also kind of segues into our second film, in the sense of the project in Red Hook. Again, providing housing for those who are not as fortunate, and how do we deal with resiliency and some of the other issues that come about when people are at much higher densities. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that at all, or
Well, we do. One of our pro bono clients here is also the local homeless shelter on Maui, and we deal with. We've had historically one of the highest homelessness rates in the country. So, from just a budgetary standpoint and an operating funding, by incorporating solar energy, say for the building that we're designing now for them, to expand their services to more than double what they can provide, by removing the cost of the electricity operating costs by getting donations and also incorporating the energy system into the initial design so we maximize the efficiency. We're taking money that would have just been evaporated into carbon, and we're actually being able to put that towards helping people and programs. So putting money back towards the people instead of towards fossil fuel companies, because most of the electricity that we produce comes from either oil or coal here on Maui. So,
a question regarding your practice and the projects that you're doing. Has the state or local government been looking at the projects that you're doing and what you're bringing to the table as far as design and off-grid procedures? Are they supportive? Do they question it? Do you get pushback for these things, or are you seeing maybe like even a trade-off?
It's always a trade-off, no good deed goes unpunished, I say. So, it's a balance, because when we have the technology and the wherewithal to have a house with all the amenities in a remote location, in a way, we're encouraging development in what would still be a wild area, right? So it's a balance for us. So we try to always keep in mind and keep a mix of projects where we're not just focusing on greenfield sites, or also trying to encourage and be involved in our local AIA chapter, as well as with our local government, to provide feedback and say, hey, look, we need more housing, so we need urban growth boundaries because people in the community don't want to see the entire island developed. But we also need to increase density. So we're doing that. We keep having that conversation. Another thing that we've seen in the last year, we had a Supreme Court case. The county of Maui had an injection well on the west side that was polluting the ocean. It went all the way to the Supreme Court. And some of the local government officials reached out to us and said, hey, let's talk about wastewater. What can you tell us about wastewater? And it's like, well, there's a problem with wastewater in that, because one of the solutions from one of our representatives was, how about composting toilets? Tell us about them. You've worked with them. And it's like, I only work with them when I have to, and it's the clients that want to work with them. But we have an issue. We can take care of the effluent from the toilet, but we still have black water from the kitchen sink, and then we have to deal with also the gray water systems are costly. So people usually don't want to install them. So yes, we're encouraged on some levels because we need more affordable housing. We want resiliency. We want things that are eco-friendly, sustainable, and renewable. But at the same time, we have to balance how much development do we actually cause because we're enabling it. So
another question too is, because we're on the other side of the country, you're seeing some technologies, I guess, coming from Asia that, again, an example, we look at the mini split systems. That was a Japanese product that was, it almost doubled the efficiency of the air conditioning systems that we were using. So you see any of that technology that hasn't yet worked its way to the East Coast that we should be aware of?
For sure, that's a good example. And we were, 10 years ago when before it was even allowed by code, because of the connection that we have with Japan. In fact, a friend of mine who owns a local air conditioning HVAC company, he's Japanese descent. And so he was one of the first dealers of the Mitsubishi split systems, and so it was really refreshing. You would see them all over the Middle East and in Asia, and then we didn't have them in the US and we didn't understand. And so he's actually able to bring them here before they were covered by, our energy code and things like that. And so that is a really interesting thing. The same thing with our battery technology. The founder of Blue Planet Energy is also the founder of the Blue Planet Foundation, which his name is Hank Rogers. He's a retired video game and programming guy. He started the Blue Planet Foundation because he wanted to see Hawaii become renewable and sustainable. And he thought that, his children would see an apocalyptic, or grandchildren see an apocalyptic environment, right? Rising seawaters and rising temperatures. And so he was playing video games with a friend of his and was saying, hey, my foundation figured out that Hawaii, what really the problem is energy storage. And his friend says, oh, we've got a really cool energy storage system, but our shareholders don't want to take it to market because it's not part of our business model. Well, the guy he's playing video games with is the CEO of Sony. So Sony developed the battery technology that started way back with the first camcorder. So that battery technology has been advancing. And because of the connections between Japan and Hawaii, we got it in Hawaii first. And so we actually had, our own battery manufacturing facility, 8 years ago now, that was producing state-of-the-art lithium-ion, batteries.
David, I just want to thank you very much for everything and your perspective. We have a couple more questions before we let you go. That's okay?
Sure, of course.
All right. And this is a good segue. How do you see design adaptation and transformation going forward with things like smart home concepts, self-driving cars, AI driving, what you do in the home, how it controls your home? Being on that kind of design side of it in your firm, you must be a little closer.
Yeah, we're not as concerned with unlocking your front door with your iPhone and things like that. But we really like the opportunities that having, the ability to say turn on your washing machine or your dishwasher or air conditioners remotely, having those smart functions incorporated with the power electronics. So we do a lot of things like allowing the car charger to come on for the electric car once the batteries in the house reach a certain state, and it just keeps advancing how much we can do and how much we can offer the clients. We're always going back to them with, here's your return on your investment. When we look at electric cars, 8 years ago, we would have said, oh, well, it'd be great if we could have an electric car, but you're off grid. Well, now it's totally possible. We can control the energy system in a way and have that correspond to the needs of the car. And it works so smoothly and flawlessly that you're actually saving money on gasoline. Again, we have really high gas prices here and really high energy costs. So if we can make the energy for free to power your car, you can't drive very far here. So as long as you've got a pretty decent electric car, you're going to satisfy everything that you can do. So on the smart home side, that's the key for us, is that integration of your power generation and consumption.
That's a good sell for new clients, having the ROI, the advancing technologies, and your data bank of previous projects where you can say, look, this is where they hit their return. This is what you can do to beat that. This is the technology now that's even better than it was 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The other thing that I'll say that's been interesting is as we start to, we're always dealing with beautiful scenery here. So just as any client, they want that, the home or the spaces oriented towards the view. That's not always advantageous to the way that the sun works and the way the prevailing winds work. And so we're able to really show them that. And so when we can equate the orientation of the home, the shape of the roof, the overhangs to an actual, return on your investment. Like, okay, we can drop your air conditioning needs if we're working on the more arid side of the island by increasing your overhangs. We can calculate that cost. We increase your overhangs. We're also increasing the amount of real estate that we can put solar panels on. So we can calculate that cost, and we can start to balance those things. But we can also incorporate the client in thinking about the home and how it actually functions, and having that in, sort of drive the form and the function of the home. And that's been a really interesting thing to see as clients start to tune into that. And we start to talk about the roof. It's also given us some opportunities, say, we've done some pretty funky things with roofs in the way that, okay, the house isn't facing the optimal orientation for solar gain, for solar PV, but we're looking at a beautiful beach. So how do we do that? Well, we can actually get more expressive with the roof, and the client will go for it because they can say, oh, I'll pay for it with the solar energy that we're going to produce. We're happy because we get to make a cool house that doesn't just have a normal, hipped roof. And so it's a win for everybody in a lot of ways.
Do you present it over to your client rather than just return on investment, what the life cycle cost is, and maybe the impact on the environment, in the sense of, them being a little bit more sensitive, to the world, not just, not to their bottom line?
Sure. It's not as much of a issue now. Now we have people actually seeking us out for what we're doing. So our values are already aligned, but we do have, commercial clients that obviously it's an issue. And so we look at the return on the investment, but we also just, we try to tell them, this is important and it's important to us. So we've actually, included, there's the sustainability objectives in the B101. We've started putting on their net zero. We want this to be net zero, and if they want to work with us, then that's what they need to want too. So it's always, we don't want to push too much, but we're really trying on our side to make that a requirement for the clients.
Now, David, you've discussed a 1,000 square foot house, and you've told us that you're also doing a 10,000 square foot house. Are there specific design criteria or even limitations that go into building off-grid, size, location on your island, whether it's in a microclimate or not, do you max out at a certain square footage, or do you really try to push the envelope?
Well, yeah, no, we always try to keep it as small as possible. And, that's again, we equate that. The reason for that is the cost of building, and then just the sheer, it's difficult to build here. We have very few trades relatively. So the smaller it is, the easier it is to construct. And we want to incorporate the outside. People come to Hawaii not to be inside of a building. So that's the other driving design parameter that we really push. But we do have, we are seeing more and more pushback, like I was mentioning with the McMansion sort of bills that are trying to stop those larger square footage houses and developments, especially in the sensitive shoreline areas. So there are mechanisms that are trying to stop that. The ADU bills, of course, are based on lot size, and that'll determine the maximum square footage of the ADUs. So we do have some things that are already regulating our square footages.
Okay.
Maybe looking at our third movie, again, 33M's work, where they're looking at using local materials, and also looking at some of the organic materials. I mean, as an example, if you were, I don't know if you're familiar with the, back in 2014, Museum of Modern Art and PS1 actually built a home out of mushrooms. I know that was kind of extreme, but I'm thinking, do you see any of that happening with your practice, in the future?
I mean, we're definitely open to it, but of course we're limited. We've got to check all the boxes in the IBC and the IRC, right? So there has to be some more progress, I think, on the experimental home side to help let our building code, sort of accommodate for that. So we would love to. I'm not sure what my insurance company would think about, how do you cover if someone eats your mushroom home? But yeah, we definitely
maybe the flip of that is looking at some of the vernacular architecture within your area. Like in our case, the use of cedar roof shingles, where they basically would actually take breathe, and then when it would rain, the moisture would cause the shingles to expand and create a waterproof roof. So are there anything within the vernacular architecture in Hawaii that basically were addressing these issues of cooling before you had air conditioning that you're able to incorporate in your design? And maybe you're doing that already. I'm just, I'm just looking at that as a, as a way of kind of incorporating that, work.
Yeah, well, I mean, there was an architect there were some really unique architects in Hawaii in the last 100 or so years. One of them, which gave kind of if you see a roof, you call it a Hawaiian hip, or the technical is a Dickey roof. This architect, I think John Dickey, he made a roof, and he had is hipped, and it was basically patterned after King Kamehameha's house or hale in Waikiki, 180 years ago. And it has split pitches, and it lends itself to a Dutch hip. So you have a lower slope on the outer portions of the roof. Those lend themselves to become covered porches to lessen the pitch, so that your eave and your fascia height are high enough so you can walk under it, but it provides more shading. But then the center roof portion is a double the slope, so it tends to be higher. So in a hot climate, the heat goes up, and then if it's a Dutch hip, then we can have gable vents on each end, but we have a full shading of a really sheltering roof. So that's one of the main things. People come all the time and say, "Oh, I want the Hawaiian hip roof, but we don't want it quite like that." So we've been able to modify it, and some other architects have been able to do that too. Tom Kundig has a couple of houses that are like that. And it's just nice to see taking that vernacular architecture and then applying it to what we need today.
Interesting.
David, two more questions before we let you go. First, a more global one, and then the second one will be a more personal one. Do you feel, and I bring this up for things that we've discussed in grassroots and other programs, but do you feel the need to repackage the concept of sustainable design or green design? Do we call it resiliency? Do we call it self-sufficiency? do we have societal objects that we have to face? You know, I know personally when you say green design, people start rolling their eyes. They've heard it too many times for too many years. How do we kind of drive architecture back towards that?
Yeah, definitely we have an issue with branding that we're always struggling with. We'll get calls from descendants of the Unabomber wanting an energy system in a remote cabin somewhere, and that's not our thing. We're trying to push luxury, and what I would really like to get is a client that's a pop star or a rapper that can say, hey, I've got 5 Bentleys in the garage, and but I've also got this really badass energy system. This is what wealth looks like, right? This is what opulence looks like. This is what being successful in our society looks like. So we got to switch that from being the granola hippie, prepper type person to it being, respected in mainstream society. And so that's what we're trying to do just by example. So trying to show places that you wouldn't think are maybe off grid, and we're trying not to lead with that, so to speak, and just create good architecture. And then, oh, by the way, it's off grid. And for us, it's helpful because, again, we're pushed to do things sometimes that change the form, shape, size, volumes of the structures, because we're trying to achieve more than just satisfying someone's aesthetics. So I think there's room there, but we've got to get it more mainstream, and I think it's getting there. So
Okay. And before we let you go, one question that we have: if you could go back in time to your very first day of architecture school, what advice would you give yourself?
I had the pleasure of having Stephen Hall as a guest lecturer for one of my studios, and I asked him a similar question: what he would learn more in architecture school, and he said business. And I've tried to take that to heart, and it's still, even though I've really tried to focus on it the last 15, 20 years, it's still one of the toughest aspects of the job, right? We always tell our junior staff members, that are actually getting to focus on the design more when I'm talking to clients, lawyers, and the planning department, and I've pulled my hair out already, obviously. So to get to focus on the design and really just be immersed in that all the time and not have to worry about the business side. So if I was a business whiz, that should definitely help things a lot.
I think we can all relate to that. JR, how about you?
Well, I guess we actually have to agree. It's the business portion of architecture. We're looking at it and look at other professions that are successful. I look at professions such as chiropractors. I mean, part of their formal education is how to run a practice. How to bill, how to do those things, because if you don't have the fuel, you can't, you're not able to do the type of work or find the time to finance the type of work you really like to do that need that time and effort.
Okay. Hana Kassem just joined us.
Hi everybody. Apologies for my delay. There was some miscommunication, but I'm here. I don't see my video, but I can hear you and I can see you.
Okay, great. Well, David, you're more than welcome to stay on. I'm sure we have a couple of questions for Hana, or you can leave. I know we've taken up a lot of your time already.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I do have a busy schedule, so I'm going to hop off, but thank you. I appreciate the conversation and look forward to talking with you guys again, and hopefully it can be in person next time.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, David Sellers of Hawaii Off-Grid, thank you very much. Hana, thank you for joining us.
Absolutely.
How is your evening going?
It's going fine, thanks. I know I'm coming in late at the program, but if anybody has any thoughts or questions about the film that you shared, I'm happy to respond to them and talk about any aspect of it.
It was a great film, by the way. The community involvement, I think, is probably what our members would be most interested in. Has that continued based on the last scene of your film, that it was, paramount?
Somehow, could you repeat that again?
The last scene of your film says that community involvement was paramount to the project going forward and everything regarding that. How is the project progressing?
The project's going really well. I think that, construction is advancing, and every time I've gone by the site, there's piles and piles of dirt being moved at an impressive pace. I imagine that it's difficult for the residents to handle so much construction at once, but I think it's being done thoughtfully, and it's being done for the right reasons. Resiliency is very important, and nobody wants to see Red Hook houses again without power for 3 weeks on end. So I think obviously it's a project that we're very proud of, and we're very thankful to have been given this opportunity to work with the residents and with NYCHA. And our whole team actually was fantastic. Our landscape architects, our engineers, especially, also to come up with these solutions that hopefully will last the test of time.
Good. I'm sorry, Hana, do you mind introducing yourself for our audience? I apologize.
Absolutely. Yeah. Hana Kassem. I'm a principal at KPF. And we were a pretty large team at KPF that worked on this project together with collaboration with a few of my fellow principals, including Jill Lerner and Doug Hawking and others. And so the project is made of parts. I think you saw in the film the parts that compose the project. It's a master plan. It has flood protection and mitigation measures through landscape moves, and as well as infrastructure, mostly infrastructural project with mechanical and electrical buildings. And so I've been at KPF for almost 20 years, or more than 20 years. And I've really very much enjoyed the range of work that we do. This particular project, the Red Hook project, is very unique for us. I don't think we've ever embarked on a project such as this one before, but hopefully we'll be able to do more of the kind.
Okay, great.
I guess some questions. I'm curious, looking at the housing projects like that was built in the 50s and 60s, and the follow-up to that, we had like Oscar Newman's defendable space. Did you take any of those studies and implement them in this project when you're with the landscaping?
Which studies? I'm sorry.
Oscar Newman, defendable space, where you looked at housing projects and how the geometry and how they were set up and how that implemented the rate of crime in the sense of not having a belonging place.
Not directly, but we did work in a very contextual manner, meaning that we did not apply a blanket solution throughout the whole development. We had a strategy. If you're referring to the lily pads, which are these raised platforms, we had that as a basic strategy, but we then tried to work with particular sightlines. I remember we had the head of security for that NYCHA development review our plans and work with us to make sure that there were no pockets of space that would affect negatively the safety of the whole streetscape and pedestrian life there. So I think that in general, we tried to take this kind of kit of parts system and apply it in a way that was specific to, say, a corner condition versus middle of the development condition, and make sure that that we made the adjustments needed so that spaces were we're not threatening and we're safe for the residents.
Right now, so I think I noticed within the film, you talk about basically people taking ownership of that exterior space, which is important. You know, I think some of the work that you were doing there was trying to make that, like an example. The artwork on the one wall was probably a very good example of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that when we talk about resiliency, the part that I really like to talk about is social resiliency. And that's why we call the project Resiliency Plus Heart, because when the community can hold together really tightly, it is when they can overcome a lot of obstacles and crises and problems that might arise. And the Red Hook community is a really strong one. And that prior to our intervention in the space, in other words, like there aren't really spaces at Red Hook when you walk around that facilitate so much gathering. Not even like previously, not the benches, outdoors, or when you go into the units, the buildings themselves, there are no real lobbies. It's kind of almost like a vestibule and you go right into the elevator or up the stair. There's no spaces that people that reinforce community engagement other than the Mikio Center where we held our workshops, our design workshops, and the senior center. So, you know, it was already a strong community, but what we tried to do is create spaces that would foster even more community engagement and not community engagement, but community strengthening. So the lily pads, for example, if there were a flood that was similar to the previous, Sandy superstorm situation, the residents would at least have a space that they could gather in safely, dryly, in an elevated fashion. Okay, it's outdoors, but at least it's, you're not in water. So because I think that that's just a huge improvement on the situation that they had prior to that.
Well, I think more importantly is the fact you're making that community much more livable. You know, not just in a flood condition. I think with one of the first films we watched tonight we're looking at a location in Hawaii and we're saying, oh, this is great. This is a 1,000 square foot, well, where you're working with units that are much smaller than 1,000 square feet, and you don't have the beautiful Hawaiian islands to be living on. You're living on a different island there. So the things that you're doing is trying to make those communities a much better place to live for people. And I think that goes beyond just making it water, flood proof. And I think that, I think is really what makes your project special.
Thank you. Yeah, we hope so. I mean, and I think, the other thing is with these 15 or so electric pods that the utility pods that are distributed along the whole campus, just adding a little bit of color and light that individualizes each part so that it doesn't become it doesn't remain such a repetitive kind of lacking that kind of personal attachment to a place, which we felt that was the first thing that we kind of reacted to when we walked through the site, is the relentless repetitiveness of the whole development. And so we were thinking, okay, well, we have these elements. How do we distribute them? What do we do with them to make the day-to-day, as you're saying, more humane, more habitable, friendlier, and not something that always reminds you of the flood and the threat of the flood, but just becomes part of the day-to-day environment that you live in.
I think it's very successful. I mean, really I think you're creating a sense of place there, which is, again, I think that's important. You look at most of these multifamily dwelling units that were built at that period of time. You could plop yourself in Patterson, where I grew up, or somewhere in the Bronx, and you think you don't know that you're where you are. And by doing what you're doing there, you're really giving this. And what could you do with a relatively small budget to create that? Which, again, I think that's very, very successful.
Thank you. We very much appreciate that. Thanks.
And before we get into questions, I have a favorite line from every movie, and the one from yours is to take every dollar and use it for measures that make the community more resilient. And I personally underline community in that particular line. That's the whole concept of the film and seemingly of the project, is making sure that the community was involved from the outset, having their input to try to drive the design in apparently a different direction from what you guys had initially thought were the problem spots. Could you expand on that and maybe tell us things that were cut out of the project that you had either initially thought or just maybe were a little too grand for the budget?
Yeah. Well, so your first question or your first thought was more about how we took each dollar that sort of was given to the project through the FEMA funding and wrapped it with a little bit more, and the choice of what we do, right? You're asking, were there some surprises initially? And there were definitely some surprises. I mean, we when we came to our first meeting, we thought a lot of the moves that we were proposing, we thought would be received very positively by the residents, but they were not. Like, for example, at first when we talked about, because 70% of the green spaces are fenced off with the black fence, and that the signature black fence. So when we said, well, we will take off the fences, that was immediately met by, kind of a reaction like, well, who's going to take care of the green lawn and maintain it? And who's going to prevent somebody from coming right up to my window? If I live on the first floor. So there was a lot of negative reaction to that. And then when we proposed, for example, adding benches in different areas, there was also some concerns. And sometimes in the large town hall meeting configurations or formats, people that are more vocal get heard. It doesn't mean that that's what everybody else is thinking. But we did hear things like, well, no, don't add benches there because that might become an area that could be controlled by, gang members, or it might make it difficult for me to get through and go to my apartment. So we don't want people sleeping out there. We don't want people hanging out there. This is going to encourage bad behavior and negative repercussions to the safety of the community. And so so when we went, we took good notes and went back and said, well, okay, we can't take any of this for granted. We really have to, this really has to be a two-way conversation, which was great, and good for us to realize really at the beginning, because otherwise there's no progress, and I don't think that it makes any sense to talk about community engagement leading to design outcomes if it's not really a two-way conversation. You're learning from the residents, and they're hopefully learning something from what you bring to the table, as designers and architects. So and then the second part of your question was about, what were things that we thought of but we couldn't implement somehow. FEMA restricts pretty closely how you spend the budget and the funding, and it has to be either resiliency or recovery related to that particular climatic event, right, Sandy? It cannot be just I'm improving the space. So this was the Resiliency Plus Heart. This was the taking every dollar and trying to wrap it with things. But there were elements that we were asked to just study and look at regardless, potential improvements, like, could you enlarge the lobbies and add elevators? Could you do an overcladding because, these buildings are not insulated? And so we did some quick studies, but they were never really considered as part of this project. Hopefully at some point in time, if there's funding, you know, things like that could happen. There were quite a few more, but
Okay. How is working on this project, which is it's a NYCHA, it's a FEMA, it's direct community involvement. How has it affected other projects that you've worked on moving forward? Has it given you a different kind of spin on how to address certain things?
for sure. I mean, I really welcome the opportunity to engage with any kind of resident community that would be affected by our projects in some way, shape, or form. So, I mean, I think that, yeah, we've learned, everybody, I think, on the team and beyond, because we share internally within KPF everything that we went through. But we learned a lot. We learned a lot. I mean, we learned a lot about community engagement, about the range of questions that need to be asked, about the pace of it, and at which point in time that needs to happen. And my feeling is, you know, the sooner the better, the earlier the better, really from the beginning, so that you could develop solutions kind of hand in hand, right, with the people that are going to inhabit the spaces or be around the spaces, right?
Yeah, ultimately, they're not just static buildings, you know, in a landscape. They're used. People travel them. They live there. There are ways that they can use the space for better, and there are ways that they can use the space for worse. So addressing that, very important. A question we had was, do you think that we'll ever get ahead of the curve on the climate change, or do you think we're always just going to be slow and reactionary once things happen?
That's one of my kind of big points that I always think about. I mean, I think we're a culture of reaction, not of prevention, and that's a problem that I see across everything. Everything that's happening, everything that, you know, we wait for something to happen and then we react to it, and it's usually too late. So is that going to change? I certainly hope so. I think that in pockets of space, like in pockets of the US and of the world, there is more forward thinking that tries to kind of look ahead and not only react, but think of ways of improving the situation now in a way that future proofs the context, whether it's at the scale of a city or at the scale of a building. But I think it's something that's going to take time.
I agree.
Actually, I'm interested too is the fact that the community, a lot of members of the community, is the first time they interacted with an architect, and you know, where other professions they're more familiar with. And did you think that had an impact on the community in the sense of you know, looking forward at, you know, maybe pursuing other careers that they normally wouldn't even think of?
I really hope so. I know that there were a couple of people that during our sessions or after our sessions were interested in construction positions and construction jobs and or construction administration, and we encourage them to, you know, apply and come and work with us in the construction administration part, and I would send that message out there again. They should talk to us. But I think definitely for some of the younger kids also, there were children there that attended the town hall meetings, and we had a model, and models are very accessible, you know, to everybody, because they can go and they can point to it and say, oh, that one, that's my building right there. And so I think that maybe we sparked something. And certainly, like with the East plant, the larger plant that's by the BQE, we created this window into the boiler rooms with the purpose of it being kind of an educational element, right? So hopefully, maybe potentially, students can be taken on tours. They can they can see what this building is about. They can understand why it's there. They can start to connect resiliency, climate, engineering, architecture, urban planning all together, to maybe make a career out of it. It'd be fantastic.
I agree.
I want to talk about the lily pads, but first, your movie was part of the AIA 2019 short film program. Could you tell us about the experience it was or you had making the movie? How long did it take? Who was your crew? And what kind of reactions did you get after that and between then and now?
Well, I do want to give credit to Claire Dubb, who was our is our in-house, very talented filmmaker, also trained as an architect. And we worked very closely together with her, the whole team did. And she did an amazing job sort of weaving together the interviews, the visuals, the story. We worked pretty closely, but she has a really great knack and good way of making this film so that it was, I think, impactful and accessible to people that were not necessarily architects. You get it immediately, and it was a really fun collaboration, I think.
That's good.
One of my favorite parts of the film is the beginning of it, like how it starts.
The character, that guy that you interviewed.
It's fantastic, and I think we all had fun doing it. And the residents, again, back to Claire's ability to communicate with people, I think they were very welcoming, and once they understood what it was about, a lot of them were very happy to speak for a long time. So she had a lot of footage to work from.
That's good. It's nice to have somebody who can engage with everyone like that and then just put it all together into a movie that's impactful and approachable. Going back to the lily pads, it's an interesting concept, and I like how it was thought that you need the view from the street, whether it's police or people walking by, they can see into the courtyard. The concept of ownership of the lily pad, as well as its passive defense of floodwaters. Who came up with it? How was it collaborated? And in the video, it looks like there's a little inset where water can kind of maybe flow in. Is that true, or is that just something?
No.
Okay.
The water cannot go into the lily.
It's just a berm, basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's basically a series of terraced landscape platforms. So it will always be, the top of the lily pad would always be above the flood elevation. We hope. At this point, because we added some measures. We added some extra to it, a little bit. Who came up with it? That's always, people always like to ask questions about the authorship, and I have to say that it was a real collaboration together with our landscape architects, Olin, and I really cannot. I mean, I remember many sessions. I remember specifically sessions where we started toying with the idea of lifting up the ground, manipulating the ground plane, and it just kind of like went back and forth between all the hands. I think it was a true collaboration. We built on each other's ideas, and they played a real important role in taking it forward.
Good. How did the residents take it when you said that you wanted to just extrude the ground?
Well, their lobbies are already raised. So actually, during Sandy, very few lobbies were impacted because but the issue is that currently there's a concrete ramp and stair to each door. So you have, like 8 of them in a courtyard. So what we did is we consolidated. So in terms of their day-to-day experience and sequence of going to their apartment, it's not too different. It's just more consolidated and more social, more communal.
Nice. Sorry, JR, were you gonna say something?
Basically, my understanding is that the electrical rooms were below flood elevations, and that's why they were destroyed during
Right.
Sandy, and you basically relocated them above flood elevation to help resolve this. But I guess there was really no monies to help within the dwelling units themselves to improve their performance or resiliency at all, even the ground floor units.
Well, since they were not impacted by Sandy, then we couldn't do anything about them.
And even with the changes with the floodplain, with FEMA actually post Sandy, when they redid the flood maps, those units were still unimpacted.
Well, we did some around the walls of the existing buildings. We did some dry flood proofing in some areas. So, and it was a combination, like, again, the solutions were very specific to each area, each zone, and its conditions. So, so there is some additional protection around the bases of some of the buildings through this dry flood proofing, but we couldn't do any work in the apartments themselves, because the apartments themselves, I mean, they need a lot of work and maintenance and rewiring and a whole slew of things, but we couldn't do that. It was not, it was not considered as the FEMA project that we were commissioned to do.
Well, Hannah, unfortunately, we need to start bringing this to a close, but we do want to end on a fun note, if you don't mind. We asked this of David and of JR. If you could go back in time to your very first architecture school, what advice would you give to yourself?
Something that I should have done that didn't do, or
just what would you tell yourself on your
as an architecture student? What would I tell
your first day of architecture school?
I would say learning how to listen really carefully. Learning how to listen attentively, carefully, and in many ways is something that that would be the piece of advice I would give myself. And that's listening to both what's going around, what people are saying to you or trying to say, listening to a context and understanding it before making a move, but also listening to yourself. And not losing your own voice in whatever is happening. So, I mean, I think like this idea of listening is something that I've been thinking about quite a bit. And I feel like it's not emphasized enough in school. Students are pushed to do and do it quickly. And there's a lot of pressure. And so again, it's like a lot of reaction. We were talking about that earlier. But I think the listening part needs to be given a little bit more time.
Oh, thank you. That was an unexpected response, and I think something that we could all take to heart. Thank you very much. Hana Kassem of Kohn Pederson Fox, thank you very much for coming out tonight. Your film was great. The project is incredible, and we wish you the best of luck in that and everything else moving forward.
And thank you so much for inviting me and thinking of our project and our film. It was this was really fun. Thanks a lot.
Hopefully next year in person. Well, I think that wraps it up for the Flow Green Film Festival. To our audience members who have stayed with us the whole time, JR, would you like to say anything before we close?
Yeah, I just, again, thank you for the AIA working with the Green Film Festival to make this possible. And again, we do have some events coming up. Again, our foam drive, and we're going to actually have a video on EV cars. So I think that you should be looking towards your local environmental commissions and see what resources are possible that are out there. And again, thank you.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us, everybody. And as you were told at the beginning of the presentation, keep an eye out for the survey in order to get your credits. It should be landing in your inbox tomorrow. Have a very good night. Have a good evening, and stay safe and healthy. Goodbye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye now.
Bye-bye. Thank you again.